The text arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and Sophie Carter nearly dropped her phone into the bathtub when she saw the name on the screen. She had been soaking in lukewarm water for the past 40 minutes, trying to wash away the exhaustion of another 14-hour shift at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Her muscles ached from hauling bags of feed and wrestling an injured deer into a transport crate. The last thing she expected was a message from Fletcher Thornton, the man she had met exactly once, 3 weeks ago, under the strangest circumstances imaginable. The message was simple. "Are you still awake? I cannot stop thinking about what you said." Sophie sat up in the tub, water sloshing over the sides as she grabbed a towel with one hand and clutched her phone with the other. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had assumed their brief conversation at the veterinary supply warehouse had been nothing more than a random encounter between two strangers killing time while waiting for their orders. He had been dressed in an expensive suit that seemed wildly out of place among the bags of kibble and medical supplies. She had been wearing mud-stained cargo pants and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. They had talked for maybe 20 minutes. She had mentioned her work with injured wildlife, her frustration with the lack of funding for conservation efforts, and her dream of opening a sanctuary that could handle larger animals. He had listened with an intensity that made her nervous, asking thoughtful questions that suggested he actually cared about her answers. Then his order had been ready, and he had walked out the door without even asking for her number. She had thought about him more than she cared to admit in the weeks that followed. His dark hair, slightly too long and clearly expensive. The way his blue eyes had focused on her like she was the only person in the world. The quiet confidence in how he carried himself. But she had convinced herself it was pointless to dwell on a man who was clearly out of her league and had shown no interest in seeing her again. Now he was texting her at midnight. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She wanted to play it cool, to wait a reasonable amount of time before responding, but curiosity won out. "Which part?" she typed back, then immediately regretted how eager it sounded. The response came within seconds. "The part about animals understanding human emotion better than most humans do. I have been in meetings all week with people who smile while planning to stab each other in the back. It made me remember what you said." Sophie climbed out of the tub and wrapped herself in her worn bathrobe, leaving wet footprints across the bathroom floor as she moved to her bedroom. She sat on the edge of her bed staring at the screen. "Bad week," she wrote, "the worst, but texting you is already making it better. Is that too forward?" A smile tugged at her lips despite herself. "Maybe a little, but I will allow it since you waited 3 weeks to text me. I thought you had forgotten about me." "Impossible, I lost your number." "Well, I never got your number. I had to track you down through the warehouse. I hope that is not too creepy." Sophie laughed out loud in her empty apartment. "That is definitely creepy, but also kind of flattering." "How did you manage that?" "I have my ways." "Actually, I called them and said I had been talking to a woman about wildlife rehabilitation and needed to get in touch with her about a potential donation. The manager gave me the name of the center where you work. I called there today and convinced your colleague Brad to give me your number." "Brad gave you my personal number?" Sophie felt a flash of annoyance. She would need to have words with Brad about privacy. "I may have mentioned I was interested in funding a new medical wing." He became very cooperative. "So you bribed your way to my phone number." "I prefer to think of it as strategic resource allocation." Sophie found herself grinning at her phone like a teenager. This was absurd. She did not even know this man. Strategic resource allocation to get a girl's number. That is a new one. You are not just any girl, Sophie. You are the woman who spent 20 minutes passionately explaining the rehabilitation process for orphaned fox kits while most people would have been checking their phones. You are the woman whose eyes lit up when talking about releasing a healed owl back into the wild. I have not been able to stop thinking about you. Her breath caught in her throat. Nobody had ever talked to her like this before. Her last relationship had ended 2 years ago with a guy who thought her job was weird and could not understand why she would not just work at a regular vet clinic where she could make more money. Fletcher, she typed slowly. What exactly do you want? Dinner? Tomorrow night? Or tonight, technically, since it is now after midnight. Let me take you somewhere nice. I work until 8. Then I will pick you up at 8:30. Wear whatever you want. I will be the one trying not to stare at you like an idiot all evening. Sophie bit her lip, weighing her options. Every practical bone in her body screamed that this was a bad idea. She knew nothing about this man except that he had money and could track people down through supply warehouse managers. But something in his messages felt genuine, vulnerable even, despite the confident words. Okay, she typed. But if you turn out to be a serial killer, I have very large friends with access to birds of prey. Noted, I will be on my best behavior. Sleep well, Sophie. I will be counting the hours. She fell asleep with her phone still in her hand and a smile on her face. The next day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Sophie found herself checking the clock every 10 minutes, torn between excitement and anxiety. She told her coworker Marissa about the date during their lunch break, leaving out the part about how Fletcher had obtained her number. Wait, the hot guy in the suit from the warehouse, Marissa practically shrieked. I remember you talking about him. You said he was probably married or something. I said he was probably out of my league, Sophie corrected. Same difference. This is amazing. What are you going to wear? Sophie looked down at her work clothes, currently covered in a mixture of bird droppings and medicinal ointment. I have no idea. I do not exactly have a lot of fancy dresses in my closet. You have that blue dress from your sister's wedding. That was 5 years ago. I do not even know if it still fits. Then leave early and go shopping. I will cover for you. Sophie shook her head. I cannot leave. We have 3 new intakes coming this afternoon, and that falcon with the wing injury needs another treatment session. You are impossible, Marissa sighed. Fine. But at least shower before he picks you up. Maybe brush your hair. As it turned out, the afternoon was even busier than expected. A hawk with a damaged wing arrived at 6, requiring immediate attention. By the time Sophie had stabilized the bird and filled out all the necessary paperwork, it was already 7:45. She raced through a shower at the facility, grateful that she kept a change of clothes in her locker for emergencies. The blue dress from her sister's wedding still fit, though it was a bit tighter than she remembered. She towel-dried her long, dark hair and let it fall in natural waves around her shoulders, applied minimal makeup, and declared herself acceptable approximately 3 minutes before Fletcher was due to arrive. He showed up at exactly 8:30, driving a sleek black car that probably cost more than Sophie made in 3 years. She watched from the window as he got out, and her stomach did a small flip. He wore dark jeans and a gray button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, somehow managing to look both casual and impossibly sophisticated. When he saw her walking toward him, his entire face transformed with a smile that made her knees weak. You are even more beautiful than I remembered, he said, opening the car door for her. You are quite the charmer, she replied, sliding into the passenger seat and immediately feeling out of place in the luxurious interior. I am really not, he said, getting in beside her. I am actually terrible at this. I have not been on a real date in over a year. I almost canceled 5 times today because I was convinced I would say something stupid and ruin everything. His honesty disarmed her completely. Well, I almost stood you up because a hawk came in with a compound fracture and I lost track of time, so we are even. He laughed, a genuine sound that filled the car with warmth. How is the hawk? Stable. He will need surgery, but I think he has a good chance of flying again. You care so much about them, Fletcher observed, pulling out of the parking lot. The animals, I mean. It is written all over your face when you talk about them. They cannot help themselves, Sophie said simply. They are at the mercy of a world that keeps shrinking around them. Roads, buildings, pollution, humans who see them as pests or trophies. The least I can do is give them a fighting chance. Fletcher was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the wheel. My father used to hunt, he said finally. Big game, mostly. He had heads mounted all over his study. I hated going in there as a kid, all those dead eyes staring at nothing. But you do not hunt. No. I bought the company that was developing land near a protected wetland last year, shut down the development project and donated the land to the state for conservation. My board of directors thought I was insane. Sophie turned to look at him fully for the first time since getting in the car. You did what? It was not purely altruistic, he admitted. The development would have been a legal nightmare anyway. But I would be lying if I said your opinions did not influence my decision. We talked for 20 minutes 3 weeks ago. 23 minutes. I checked my watch when I got back to my car because I was annoyed with myself for not asking for your number. And in those 23 minutes, you changed how I saw something I had been approaching as purely a business problem. The restaurant he took her to was quiet and elegant, the kind of place where the waiters moved like shadows and the menu had no prices. Sophie felt underdressed despite her sister's wedding dress, but Fletcher never made her feel anything less than perfectly appropriate. They talked through multiple courses of food that Sophie barely tasted because she was too focused on the man sitting across from her. He told her about growing up with a distant father who built a pharmaceutical empire and a mother who died when he was 15. She told him about her childhood spent volunteering at animal shelters, and the moment she knew she wanted to dedicate her life to wildlife rehabilitation. So you are a billionaire, Sophie said over dessert, finally brave enough to address what had become increasingly obvious throughout the evening. Fletcher paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. I am. Does that bother you? I do not know yet, she said honestly. It feels like we are from completely different worlds. We are, he agreed. But maybe that is not such a bad thing. I spend my days in boardrooms with people who only care about profit margins and market share. You spend your days saving lives. I think I need more of your world in mine. My world involves a lot of animal waste and early mornings. I can handle that. And not a lot of money. The center operates on grants and donations. I drive a 15-year-old truck and live in a tiny apartment. I do not care about any of that. He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. I care about the way your voice softens when you talk about releasing an animal back into the wild. I care about the fact that you would rather be covered in bird droppings doing work you love than making 3 times as much money doing something you hate. I care about the way you look at the world and see things worth saving instead of things worth exploiting. Sophie felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. You barely know me. Then let me know you better. Go on another date with me and another one after that. Let me be part of your world, Sophie. She squeezed his hand. Okay, but you have to actually visit the center, see what I do. If you can handle a full day of that and still want to see me, then maybe we have something here. Deal. When can I come? This Saturday. Be there at 6 in the morning. Wear clothes you do not mind ruining. Fletcher grinned. I will be there at 5:55. He drove her home and walked her to her apartment door like a perfect gentleman. When he kissed her good night, it was soft and sweet and left her wanting more. Saturday morning arrived with a storm that turned the sky gray and sent rain hammering against the center's metal roof. Sophie arrived at 5:30, expecting Fletcher to text with an excuse about the weather. Instead, she found him already in the parking lot, sitting in his expensive car and watching the rain. She tapped on his window and he jumped, then laughed at himself. He got out wearing jeans, work boots, and an old sweatshirt that looked like it might have been from college. "You actually came," she said. "I said I would. Should we make a run for it?" They sprinted through the rain together, arriving at the door breathless and laughing. Sophie unlocked the building and led him inside, flipping on lights as they went. "Welcome to my world," she said, spreading her arms wide. The center was not glamorous. It consisted of several buildings housing different types of animals in various stages of recovery. The air smelled like disinfectant, bird feed, and the earthy scent of the woodland creatures in their care. Cages and enclosures lined the walls, and the sounds of chirping, rustling, and occasional screeches filled the space. Fletcher looked around with genuine interest, not the polite but detached expression Sophie had seen on other visitors' faces. "How many animals do you have here right now?" 43. "Mostly birds, but we also have some mammals, foxes, raccoons, a deer that was hit by a car last month, plus some reptiles and amphibians. Can I help?" She studied him carefully. "It is not pretty work." "I did not come here for pretty, I came here for you." Something in her chest melted completely. "Okay then, let me show you what a typical day looks like." She put him to work immediately, testing his sincerity. They started by preparing breakfast for the various animals, which involved chopping vegetables, thawing frozen mice for the raptors, and mixing specialized formulas for younger animals. Fletcher did not flinch when she handed him the container of frozen mice. He did not complain when he got splashed with water while cleaning enclosures. He listened carefully to her instructions and asked thoughtful questions. By mid-morning they were both soaked with rain, sweat, and various other fluids Sophie did not bother to identify. Fletcher had a scratch on his arm from a grumpy raccoon, dirt under his fingernails, and he had never looked more attractive to her. "You are really good at this," she said, watching him gently secure a bandage on an injured squirrel's leg while she held the creature steady. "I am just following your lead." He focused on his task with the same intensity she imagined he brought to running his company. "There. How does that look?" Sophie examined his work. "Perfect. You are hired. Does that mean I get to come back, if you want to?" He looked up at her, his blue eyes serious despite the absurd situation they were in, both crouched on the floor of a treatment room with an irritated squirrel between them. "I want to come back every day if you will let me. Fletcher, I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other, but I feel something with you that I have never felt with anyone else, like I can finally breathe after holding my breath for years." The squirrel chose that moment to bite Fletcher's thumb. He yelped and jerked his hand back, and Sophie could not help but laugh even as she quickly secured the animal in its recovery cage. "Let me see," she said, taking his hand in hers. The bite had not broken the skin badly, just left a small red mark. "I am fine," he said, but he did not pull his hand away. "You need to be more careful. Wild animals are unpredictable." "So are my feelings for you, apparently." He smiled ruefully. "Too much, maybe, but I like it anyway." She stood up, pulling him with her. "Come on, I want to show you something." She led him to the flight enclosure out back, a large netted area where birds practiced flying again before being released. Inside were 3 owls in various stages of recovery and a red-tailed hawk that had been hit by a car 6 months ago. The hawk is going to be released next week, Sophie explained. Her wing healed perfectly. Watch this. She stepped into the enclosure and made a soft clicking sound. The hawk immediately flew to a perch near her, landing with perfect precision. She is magnificent, Fletcher breathed from outside the netting. She is, and in a few days she will be back where she belongs. Sophie reached out slowly, and the hawk tolerated her presence, though it did not seek her touch. This is why I do what I do. Every animal we release is a small victory against all the ways humans have damaged the natural world. Fletcher watched her with an expression she could not quite read. When she came back out of the enclosure, he said, "I want to fund your sanctuary." Sophie froze. "What? You said at the warehouse that you wanted to open a larger facility that could handle bigger animals. Bears, wolves, maybe even large cats if they were injured or orphaned. Let me fund it." "Fletcher, that would cost. I do not care what it costs. I have more money than I could spend in 5 lifetimes. Let me use it for something that matters. You cannot just throw money at me because we have been on 2 dates. I am not throwing money at you. I am investing in something I believe in. Your work, your passion, your vision. Whether you date me or not, I want to help make this happen." Sophie shook her head, overwhelmed. "That is insane, probably. But I have spent the last decade making insane amounts of money doing things that do not matter. Let me do something that does. I need to think about this. Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless of anything else that happens between us." They worked side by side for the rest of the day. Marissa arrived at noon and nearly dropped the box of supplies she was carrying when she saw Fletcher elbow-deep in cleaning a fox enclosure. "You actually got him to do real work," she whispered to Sophie when Fletcher was out of earshot. "I am impressed. He volunteered," Sophie whispered back. "Girl, if he is willing to shovel fox poop after 2 dates, he is a keeper." Sophie could not argue with that logic. As the day wound down and the rain finally stopped, Sophie and Fletcher sat on the back steps of the main building, watching the sun break through the clouds. "Thank you for today," he said. "I cannot remember the last time I felt this useful. You run a billion-dollar company. You are useful every day. I make money. That is not the same thing as being useful. Today I helped save lives, even in small ways. That matters." Sophie leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture that felt natural despite how little time they had spent together. "You can come back anytime. We can always use volunteers. What about volunteers who want to take you to dinner again, and breakfast and lunch, basically all the meals?" she laughed. "Those volunteers are also welcome." He kissed the top of her head, and Sophie felt something settle into place in her chest. This man, this impossible billionaire who had tracked down her phone number and showed up to shovel animal waste in the rain, was becoming important to her far faster than was probably wise. Over the next few weeks, Fletcher became a regular presence at the center. He showed up early on Saturday mornings and stayed late into the evening. He learned how to tube feed baby birds, how to handle aggressive animals safely, and how to recognize signs of stress or illness. The other volunteers initially treated him with suspicion, but his genuine interest and willingness to do the dirty work won them over. Sophie learned about his life in pieces, stories shared between tasks or over quick lunches. His company had been started by his father, who had been brilliant but cold, more interested in profit than people. Fletcher had inherited control when he was 26, thrust into a position of power he had not felt ready for. He had spent the past 8 years proving himself, building the company into an empire and losing himself in the process. "I do not even like what we make," he admitted one evening while they were cataloging medical supplies. "Pharmaceuticals, medical devices, all important stuff, but it is so removed from the actual patients. It is just numbers and market projections and patent fights. Why not sell the company? Sophie asked. Because 2,000 people depend on it for their livelihoods. I cannot just walk away. But I can make different choices about how we operate. That land I told you about, the wetland conservation. I am looking at other properties now, trying to balance profit with actually giving a damn about the world we live in. Influenced by anyone in particular, Sophie teased. You have no idea how much you have changed my perspective. He set down the clipboard he had been holding and pulled her close. I used to think success meant having the biggest profit margins and the most impressive portfolio. Now I think it might mean waking up next to someone who makes me want to be better. Someone who sees the best in me even when I do not see it in myself. They had been taking things slowly physically, but the kiss he gave her then was deeper, more urgent. Sophie melted into it, her hands fisting in his shirt as months of tension finally found release. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. I am falling in love with you, he said. I know it is too soon to say that. I know we are still figuring this out, but I need you to know. It is not too soon, Sophie whispered, because I am falling for you too, so fast it scares me. Yeah, he kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise. Come home with me tonight. I want to wake up with you tomorrow. Sophie had never been to Fletcher's house. She had been deliberately avoiding it, not wanting to be overwhelmed by the wealth she knew she would find there. But now, wrapped in his arms with her heart wide open, she nodded. His house was not what she expected. Yes, it was large and beautiful, perched on a hillside with views of the valley below. But it was not ostentatious or cold. The furniture looked comfortable and lived in. Books filled the shelves. Large windows brought the outdoors inside. This is lovely, she said, exploring the open-plan living area. I bought it 3 years ago because of the land, he explained. 40 acres, most of it forest. I wanted space where I could breathe. 40 acres. Sophie walked to the windows, looking out at the darkened forest beyond. Want to see the best part? He took her hand and led her through the house to a back deck. When he flipped a switch, soft lights illuminated the yard and the forest beyond. Sophie gasped. Deer grazed at the edge of the tree line. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness. The sound of a stream burbled in the distance. It is like your own private sanctuary, she breathed. That is the idea. I have been working with a wildlife consultant to make it as habitat-friendly as possible. Native plants, water sources, protected areas. I wanted to create something that gives back. She turned to face him, this man who kept surprising her at every turn. Who are you, Fletcher Thornton? I am just a guy who wants to build something meaningful, preferably with you. He wrapped his arms around her waist. Stay with me tonight. And tomorrow, and as many days as you will give me. That night they made love for the first time, slow and tender and full of whispered promises. Sophie woke in his arms as dawn light filtered through the windows, feeling more at peace than she had in years. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. Fletcher continued volunteering at the center, becoming as invested in the animals' welfare as any of the full-time staff. He started bringing business contacts to visit, introducing them to Sophie's work and securing donations that allowed them to expand their operations. True to his word, he began seriously planning the sanctuary Sophie had dreamed about. He purchased 200 acres of land an hour outside the city, complete with forests, meadows, and a small lake. He hired architects and wildlife experts to design facilities that would allow for the rehabilitation and care of larger animals while maintaining their dignity and wild nature. Sophie was involved in every decision, her expertise guiding the project. She could not believe this was real, that this man had taken her passing comment about a dream and turned it into something concrete. The construction should be finished by next fall, Fletcher told her one evening as they reviewed the plans spread across his dining room table. We will need to hire more staff, probably at least 10 people to start. You would run it, obviously. Full control over operations and intake decisions. Fletcher, this is too much. The amount of money you are spending is mine to spend however I want, and I want to spend it on this, on you, on something that matters. He pulled her into his lap, nuzzling her neck. Besides, it is a legitimate business expense. The pharmaceutical company will partner with the sanctuary for research into wildlife diseases and environmental impacts on health. We can learn from the animals you treat. You have it all figured out. I have had a lot of time to think about it. Usually while I am supposed to be paying attention in boring meetings. Sophie laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. What am I going to do with you? Love me, he said simply. That is all I need. I do, she said, the words coming easily now. I love you so much sometimes I cannot believe this is real. Believe it, because I am not going anywhere. But of course, life was never that simple. In early spring, Fletcher's company faced a crisis. A competitor launched a hostile takeover attempt, trying to buy enough shares to force a merger that would gut the company and cost hundreds of people their jobs. Fletcher spent days locked in meetings with lawyers and board members, barely sleeping, surviving on coffee and stress. Sophie did what she could to support him, bringing him meals he barely touched, listening when he needed to vent, giving him space when he needed to think. She saw a side of him she had not witnessed before, the ruthless businessman who had built an empire. He was still the man she loved, but he was also something harder, more calculating. The fight went on for weeks. Sophie felt him slipping away, consumed by the battle to save his company. They barely saw each other except late at night when he would arrive at her apartment, exhausted and troubled. Talk to me, she said one night, pulling him down onto her couch. Tell me what you are thinking. I am thinking I might lose everything I have spent a decade building. I am thinking that 2,000 people are counting on me to protect their jobs. I am thinking that I am failing them. You are not failing anyone. You are doing everything you can. What if it is not enough? His voice cracked, and Sophie saw the vulnerability beneath his confident exterior. What if I let everyone down? Then we will figure it out together. Fletcher, you are not alone in this. I am here. Whatever happens, we will face it together. He pulled her close, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. I do not deserve you. Yes, you do. You deserve everything good that comes your way. The takeover attempt ultimately failed. Fletcher and his board managed to secure enough shares and loyal investors to maintain control. But the victory came at a cost. Fletcher had to make concessions, including selling off parts of the company and restructuring operations. It was brutal and exhausting, and Sophie watched him age years in a matter of months. When it was finally over, he showed up at the wildlife center at dawn on a Saturday morning. Sophie found him sitting on the back steps, watching the sun rise over the enclosures. Hey, she said softly, sitting beside him. When did you get here? About an hour ago. I hope you do not mind. I just needed to be somewhere that made sense. The world in there, he gestured toward the animal enclosures, is honest. Survival, healing, nature. No backstabbing or board politics or lawyers. You are always welcome here, you know that. He took her hand, threading their fingers together. I want to ask you something, and you can say no. I will understand if you say no. Sophie's heart started racing. Okay, move in with me. Not just staying over sometimes, but actually living together. Bring your clothes and your books and your terrible taste in morning television. Make my house a home instead of just a place I sleep. Fletcher, I know it is a big step. I know you love your apartment and your independence. But these past few weeks, the only thing that kept me sane was knowing I would see you at the end of the day. I want that every day. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build a life with you, Sophie." She looked at this man, this impossible, wonderful man who had somehow become her entire world. "Yes, yes, yes, I will move in with you on one condition. Anything? We get a dog, a rescue who needs a home. Your 40 acres of land are wasted without a dog to enjoy them." Fletcher laughed, the sound chasing away the last shadows of stress from his face. "Deal. We will go to the shelter this week." They picked out a 3-year-old mixed breed named Ranger who had been at the shelter for 8 months because he was too energetic for most families. He fit perfectly into their life, racing through the forest on Fletcher's property and greeting them with enthusiastic joy every time they came home. Sophie moved into Fletcher's house gradually, bringing pieces of herself until the space reflected both of them. Her books mixed with his on the shelves. Her photographs of rehabilitated animals hung on the walls. The house transformed from a bachelor's retreat into a real home. The sanctuary was finished in October, a sprawling complex of enclosures and treatment facilities designed to handle everything from injured bears to orphaned wolf pups. The grand opening attracted media attention and generous donors, many of them from Fletcher's business network. Sophie stood with Fletcher at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, overwhelmed by what they had built together. "Thank you," she whispered as photographers snapped pictures and reporters asked questions, "for believing in me, for making this possible." "Thank you for showing me what is worth fighting for," he replied. "I was so lost before I met you. You gave me purpose." That night, after all the visitors had left and they were alone at the sanctuary, Fletcher led Sophie to a quiet spot overlooking the lake on the property. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I have one more surprise," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Sophie's breath caught. "Fletcher, I had a whole speech planned," he said, opening the box to reveal a ring. The diamond caught the fading light, simple and elegant. "About how you changed my life and made me believe in things bigger than balance sheets and profit margins. About how every day with you is better than anything I accomplished in my entire life before we met. But it all comes down to this. I love you, Sophie Carter. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Sophie's face as she nodded. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her as the sun dipped below the horizon. Ranger barked happily from somewhere nearby, chasing birds through the meadow. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the sanctuary, surrounded by close friends and family. Sophie wore a simple white dress and flowers in her hair. Fletcher cried when he saw her walking toward him down an aisle lined with native wildflowers. The vows they exchanged were personal, full of inside jokes and promises that went beyond the traditional words. They pledged to support each other's dreams, to face challenges together, and to never forget the moment at a supply warehouse that had brought them together. "I promise to always text you first," Fletcher said, earning laughs from the gathered guests. "And to never take for granted the miracle of having you in my life." "I promise to believe in you even when you doubt yourself," Sophie replied, "and to love you through every challenge, every success, and every ordinary moment in between." The reception was casual and joyful, held in a large tent on the sanctuary grounds. Instead of fancy catering, they served barbecue from a local restaurant. Instead of a traditional wedding cake, they had pie from the bakery where Sophie used to grab coffee before work. Everything reflected who they were as a couple, unpretentious and real. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Fletcher whispered in Sophie's ear, "Best decision I ever made, tracking down your phone number." "Best decision I ever made, responding to your text," she whispered back. "We have come a long way from that supply warehouse. The best journeys start in the strangest places." Over the next 2 years, their life together found a beautiful rhythm. Sophie ran the sanctuary, which quickly gained recognition as one of the premier wildlife rehabilitation facilities in the region. Fletcher balanced his responsibilities at the company with his volunteer work, using his platform to advocate for conservation and environmental responsibility. He transformed his business practices, shifting the company's focus toward sustainable development and ethical operations. It cost them some profits in the short term, but it attracted new investors who valued corporate responsibility. Fletcher discovered that doing good and doing well were not mutually exclusive. Sophie flourished in her role, treating hundreds of animals and releasing most of them back into the wild. The sanctuary became her legacy, a testament to what passionate dedication could accomplish when combined with the resources to make a real difference. They talked about children often, both wanting to start a family but waiting for the right time. The sanctuary needed Sophie's full attention in its early years, and Fletcher was still navigating the changes at his company. Soon, they would promise each other, when things settled down a bit, but life never really settled down. There were always new challenges, new animals in need, new business crises to navigate. They learned to find moments of peace in the chaos, stolen mornings in bed before the day began, quiet evenings watching the sunset from their deck, weekends exploring the forest with Ranger racing ahead. It was during one of those quiet evenings, 3 years after their wedding, that Sophie told Fletcher she was pregnant. He stared at her for a long moment, the wine glass in his hand frozen halfway to his lips. "Pregnant, about 8 weeks along. I found out yesterday, but I wanted to tell you in person, not over the phone while you were at a conference." Fletcher set down his glass carefully, then pulled Sophie into his arms. "We are going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby," she confirmed, laughing and crying at the same time. "I am going to be a father." He sounded awed, almost disbelieving. "The best father I know you will be." He pulled back to look at her, his hands cradling her face. "I am terrified. Me too. But also happier than I have ever been. Me too." They sat together on the deck as stars emerged overhead, talking about the future they would build for their child. A life connected to nature, grounded in values that mattered, full of love and purpose. Sophie gave birth to a daughter the following spring, a tiny perfect human they named Ivy. She had Fletcher's blue eyes and Sophie's dark hair, and from the moment she entered the world, she owned both of their hearts completely. Fletcher proved to be an incredible father, patient and devoted. He cut back his hours at the company, delegating more responsibility so he could be present for the mundane miracles of Ivy's early days. He changed diapers, handled middle-of-the-night feedings, and stared at his daughter with an expression of wonder that never faded. Sophie balanced motherhood with running the sanctuary, bringing Ivy to work once she was old enough. The little girl grew up surrounded by animals, learning gentleness and respect for all living things. Her first words were bird and dada, much to Fletcher's delight. As Ivy grew, they had more children. A son named Oliver arrived 2 years after Ivy, followed by another daughter, Emma, 2 years after that. Their house filled with noise and chaos and overwhelming love. Fletcher often joked that he ran a billion-dollar company, but his most important job was being a dad. He coached Oliver's youth sports teams, helped Ivy with science projects about animal habitats, and let Emma paint his nails during tea parties. Sophie watched him with their children and fell in love with him over and over again. This man, who had tracked down her phone number because he could not stop thinking about her, had become the center of her world, the foundation on which everything else was built. The sanctuary continued to thrive, eventually expanding to include educational programs for schools and the public. Ivy, Oliver, and Emma became junior ambassadors, helping with tours and teaching other children about wildlife conservation. Fletcher finally stepped down as CEO of his company when he turned 45, transitioning to chairman of the board so he could focus on philanthropy and family. He started a foundation dedicated to wildlife conservation and environmental protection, using his wealth and influence to support causes that aligned with their values. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they returned to the supply warehouse where they had first met. It looked exactly the same, still smelling like kibble and disinfectant, still filled with the tools of animal care. "I cannot believe it has been 10 years, Sophie said, standing in the same spot where they had first talked. "Best 10 years of my life," Fletcher replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Though I am glad we do not have to meet here anymore. The romantic ambience leaves something to be desired." She laughed, leaning back against him. "I do not know, it worked out pretty well for us." "True. Maybe we should send our kids here when they are old enough to date. It clearly has some kind of magic. Or we could just tell them about the importance of being open to unexpected connections." Fletcher turned her in his arms so they were face to face. "I almost did not text you that night. I stared at my phone for an hour, convinced you would think I was insane for tracking down your number. What made you finally do it?" "I realized that regret over trying would be worse than rejection. I could not let you be the one who got away without at least taking a shot." "I am glad you took that shot." "Me too." He kissed her softly. "Best text I ever sent." They left the warehouse hand in hand, heading back to the life they had built together. 3 children waited at home with Sophie's sister babysitting. The sanctuary had evening rounds that needed completing. Ranger, now gray-muzzled and slower, would need his evening walk. It was an ordinary life in many ways, full of the mundane tasks and responsibilities that filled anyone's days. But it was also extraordinary, built on a foundation of love that had started with a late-night text and a willingness to take a chance on something unexpected. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their story. They weathered challenges together: a health scare when Oliver broke his arm badly and needed surgery. A difficult year when the sanctuary lost several animals they had hoped to save. The normal struggles of raising children and balancing careers, and maintaining a relationship through the chaos of daily life. But they always came back to each other, to the connection that had sparked in a supply warehouse and been nurtured through countless conversations, shared dreams, and unwavering support. When Ivy turned 16, she announced she wanted to follow in Sophie's footsteps and become a wildlife rehabilitator. Sophie cried happy tears while Fletcher beamed with pride. Oliver discovered a passion for environmental law, determined to use the legal system to protect wild spaces. Emma, still young, changed her mind about her future career weekly, but she was always adamant that whatever she did, it had to help animals or nature in some way. "We raised them right," Fletcher said one evening, watching their children play with Ranger's successor, a young rescue dog named Scout. "We did," Sophie agreed. "They understand what matters. They get that from you. They get it from both of us. You are the one who showed them that having resources means nothing if you do not use them responsibly." Fletcher pulled her close, a gesture that remained as natural after 15 years of marriage as it had been on their first date. "We make a good team, the best team." On their 20th anniversary, Fletcher surprised Sophie with a trip back to the restaurant where they had their first date. The place had changed management and undergone renovations, but they requested the same table, determined to recreate the magic of that first evening. 20 years, Sophie marveled, looking at her husband across the table. Silver threaded through his dark hair now, and lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes, but he was still the most attractive man she had ever seen. 20 years since I convinced a supply warehouse manager to track you down for me, Fletcher said. Best manipulation of my resources ever. You did not manipulate anyone. You donated money to a good cause and happened to get my phone number in the process. Semantics. He reached across the table to take her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring, now worn smooth from 2 decades of wear. I have something for you. Fletcher, we agreed no big gifts. This is not big. Well, it is, but not in the way you are thinking. He pulled out his phone and turned it to face her. On the screen was a text message thread, the very first conversation they had ever had, saved all these years. You kept them, Sophie whispered, reading through their first awkward, wonderful exchange. Every message. I have them all saved and backed up. I look at them sometimes when I need to remember how we started, how one random conversation and one late-night text changed everything. Sophie felt tears welling up. I love you so much. I love you too. More than I knew it was possible to love another person. You gave me a life worth living, Sophie. A purpose beyond profit margins and board meetings. You gave me everything that matters. You did the same for me. Before you, I had my work and I was happy enough. But you showed me what it felt like to be truly seen, truly valued. You believed in me when I did not fully believe in myself. They held hands across the table, 2 people who had found each other in the most unexpected way and built something beautiful through dedication, compromise, and love that never wavered. The years that followed were gentle, settling into the comfortable rhythm of a long marriage between true partners. Fletcher fully retired from his business interests, spending his days working at the sanctuary alongside Sophie and investing time in environmental causes. Sophie began training the next generation of wildlife rehabilitators, sharing decades of knowledge with young people who had the same passion she had possessed at their age. Their children grew into remarkable adults. Ivy earned her degree in wildlife biology and returned to work at the sanctuary, eventually taking over day-to-day operations as Sophie transitioned to an advisory role. Oliver became an environmental lawyer, winning landmark cases that protected endangered species and wild lands. Emma surprised everyone by becoming a documentary filmmaker, creating stunning films about conservation efforts around the world. Fletcher and Sophie became grandparents, first to Ivy's twin boys, then to Emma's daughter. They approached grandparenting with the same dedication they had brought to everything else, teaching their grandchildren about nature, instilling values of compassion and responsibility, and creating memories that would last lifetimes. On quiet evenings, they would sit on their deck with Scouts sleeping at their feet, watching the sun set over the forest that had been their backyard for decades. They would hold hands and talk about their day, sharing the easy intimacy of 2 people who knew each other completely. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had not texted me that night? Sophie asked one evening. Fletcher considered the question seriously. Sometimes. I think I would have been successful by conventional measures, made more money, grown the company bigger. But I would have been empty inside, just going through the motions without understanding why. No wife, no kids, no sanctuary, no purpose, no joy, no you. He squeezed her hand. That text message was the most important thing I ever did. Everything good in my life came from that moment of courage. It was not just the text, Sophie said. It was everything that came after. The way you showed up for me, consistently and genuinely. The way you supported my dreams and made them bigger than I had dared to imagine. The way you loved me through everything. That was easy. Loving you has always been the easiest thing I have ever done. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged overhead. Somewhere in the sanctuary, an owl called, a sound that had been the soundtrack to their lives together. The forest around them hummed with life they had helped protect and preserve. As they stood to go inside for the night, Fletcher paused to look at Sophie in the fading light. She was older now, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face showing the lines of a life well lived. She had never been more beautiful to him. "What?" she asked, catching his gaze. "Just thinking about how lucky I am, that I walked into a supply warehouse at exactly the right moment. That I had the courage to track you down, that you gave me a chance." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Sophie said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "We found each other because we were both brave enough to reach out, you with your text message, me with my answer. Everything else was just two people choosing each other every single day." "Every single day," Fletcher agreed, wrapping his arms around his wife. "For the rest of our lives." They walked inside together, closing the door on another perfect day. Behind them, the sanctuary hummed with life animals healing, preparing to return to the wild, living out their second chances. It was a fitting legacy for two people who had found their own second chance in an unexpected text message and transformed it into a lifetime of love. The message that had started everything was still saved on Fletcher's phone, a digital reminder of the night that changed both of their lives forever. Sometimes, late at night when he could not sleep, he would pull it up and read through that first conversation, marveling at how different his life might have been if he had chosen silence instead of vulnerability. But he had chosen to reach out. Sophie had chosen to respond. And from that simple exchange grew a love story that touched hundreds of lives, human and animal, alike, creating ripples of positive change that would extend far beyond their own years. As they prepared for bed that night, moving through the familiar rhythms of a couple who had shared decades together, Fletcher pulled Sophie close one last time. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" "For answering my text. For giving me a chance. For building this incredible life with me." Sophie smiled against his chest. "Thank you for texting me in the first place, for seeing something in me worth pursuing, for never giving up on us." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, exactly as they had hundreds of nights before and would hundreds of nights to come. Outside their window, the forest whispered its nighttime song, a reminder of everything they had built together and everything still to come. The story that had begun with a billionaire finally gathering the courage to text the woman he could not stop thinking about had evolved into something neither of them could have predicted. It had become a partnership that changed lives, a family that carried their values forward, and a love that proved the simplest gestures, reaching out, responding, showing up, could transform everything. Fletcher had been right that night when he texted Sophie. His message had turned into forever. Not because of grand gestures or expensive gifts, but because two people had been brave enough to be vulnerable, patient enough to build something real, and committed enough to choose each other through every challenge and triumph that came their way. Their love story was not perfect. They had argued, struggled, faced moments of doubt and difficulty. But they had weathered every storm together, emerging stronger each time, more certain that they belonged together. As the years continued to unfold, bringing new joys and inevitable sorrows, they faced everything hand in hand. When Fletcher's father passed away, Sophie held him through his complicated grief. When the sanctuary faced a funding crisis, Fletcher used his business acumen to secure new donors and grants. When their children faced heartbreak or challenges, they presented a united front, offering wisdom born from their own experiences. They grew old together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. The passion of their early days evolved into something richer and more profound, an abiding affection built on trust, respect, and intimate knowledge of each other's souls. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends whose lives they had touched, Fletcher stood to give a toast. 50 years ago, I sent a text message to a woman I had met exactly once, he began, his voice strong despite his 75 years. It was the scariest thing I had ever done. I was convinced she would ignore it or laugh at my presumptuousness. Instead, she responded. She gave me a chance, and that chance became the greatest gift of my life. He looked at Sophie, seated beside him, still beautiful, still the woman who had changed everything. People ask me about my business success, about the deals I have made or the money I have earned. But the only success that matters is standing here with you, surrounded by the family we created and the legacy we built together. You taught me what truly matters in life. You showed me that wealth means nothing without purpose, and purpose means nothing without love. Sophie stood, taking his hand as she always had. Fletcher texted me first, she said, her voice clear and warm. But I chose to answer, and every day since then we have both kept choosing each other. That is the secret if there is one. Not some fairy tale romance, but two imperfect people committing to love each other through everything life brings. He made me brave enough to dream bigger. I made him understand that the best investments are not in markets, but in people and causes that change the world. Their children raised their glasses, their grandchildren looked on with wonder, and in that moment, the entire room felt the power of what they had built together. That night, returning home to the house they had shared for nearly 50 years, Fletcher and Sophie sat once more on their deck. The forest was older now, the trees taller, but it still sang the same nighttime song. "Do it again," Sophie said suddenly. "Do what?" "Text me. Like you did that first night." Fletcher smiled, pulling out his phone. He typed slowly, his fingers not as nimble as they once were, then hit send. Sophie's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and read. "I cannot stop thinking about you. 50 years and I am still amazed that you are mine." She typed back. 50 years and you still make my heart race. I would choose you again and again and again." They sat in the darkness, texting each other like teenagers, laughing at the absurdity and beauty of it. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way, who had built a love that stood the test of time. When they finally went to bed that night, they held each other close, grateful for every moment they had shared and every moment still to come. "Forever," Fletcher whispered, just before sleep claimed him. "Forever," Sophie agreed, her head resting over his heart, listening to the steady beat that had been her home for half a century. The message that had started as a tentative reach across the dark had indeed become forever, not just in the duration of their love, but in the impact they made together, the lives they changed, and the legacy they would leave behind. They had proven that the most important messages are the ones we are brave enough to send. And the greatest love stories begin when someone takes a chance and reaches out into the unknown, hoping to connect with another soul. And sometimes, when the timing is right and the hearts are open, that single message can transform two lives into one beautiful, enduring forever.